Mr. John Stanczak of Bicknell was a Clark Junior High School woodshop teacher, and all of us that had him as a teacher, that's what we knew him as, a woodshop teacher. But all of us that had him as a teacher, I'm sure didn't know this story, because I never heard him ever speak of it. And in the story, I will call him Mr. Stanczak out of respect for him being my teacher. And out of all of us that had him as a teacher, we all knew he was tough. But if you listened to him, you'd learn a lot about woodworking. And I'm sure all of you's been cracked across the hands with a little piece of wood or using a standard screwdriver to open up a can of varnish. But listen to this story of what he went through during World War II. On the night of February 28, 1942, the USS Houston, Admiral Tommy Hart's former Asiatic flagship, vanished without a trace somewhere off the northwest coast of Java. The mystery of the Houston remained complete until the war ended and small groups of survivors were discovered in Japs prisoner of war camps. Scattered from the island of Java to the Malay Peninsula, the jungles of Burma and Thailand, and northward to the islands of Japan, of the 1,800 officers and men who manned her, approximately 350 escaped from the sinking ship, only to be captured in the jungles of Java, or as they floundered helplessly in the sea. Of the original survivors, only 266 lived through the ordeal of filth and brutal treatment dealt out to them in Japs prisoner of war camps. Written by Commander Walter G. Winslow, United States Navy. March 17, 1942, the Navy Department has informed Mr. and Mrs. William Stanczak of Bicknell that their son John Stanczak, 25, was missing in action. He had been stationed aboard the cruiser Houston, which the Navy over the weekend announced was lost in a sea battle north of Java, last seen on the night of February 28, according to the communique. John Stanczak was a former Bicknell High School football player, entering the Navy after he graduated from high school. The message of his reported death came Saturday evening and was not given immediately to his mother, who was seriously ill. Mr. John Stanczak of Bicknell, captured after sinking of USS Houston, is liberated September 1945. Mr. John Stanczak, Bicknell sailor, USS Houston, has been liberated from the Japanese prison camp, where he has been held since his ship was lost at sea in February 1942. Stanczak was declared a prisoner of war by the Navy Department several months ago after being listed as missing in action for 2 years. Local Red Cross officials had sent to the Pacific Theater of Operations a letter from relatives of young Stanczak, carrying good news as well as bad. The bad news was that his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wozniak Stanczak, of 721 Dant Boulevard, Bicknell, are dead. They have died since John last heard from home. The letter, presumably, was handed to the sailor by overseas Red Cross workers immediately upon his transfer to the Allied hands. Stanczak's name was included in a list of men announced by the Navy last night as having reached Calcutta, India. 92 officers and men of the Houston were included in that group. All of them, with the exception of 2 Chinese mess attendants, previously had been listed as prisoners of war. The additional members of the Houston crew and officers and enlisted men also have been liberated in Thailand. The Navy said there was no immediate indication where the group now in Calcutta had been held prisoner. The Houston, which disappeared February 28, 1942, had 982 officers and men aboard it. At the time, she reported contact with the forces of the Japanese fleet. The Navy has listed 94 liberated survivors, 108 identified dead, 179 prisoners of war, 594 in missing status, and 7 men whose status is in doubt. Liberated Allied prisoners of war today recited more instances of beatings, hunger, and humiliation, including tigerish attacks by Japanese women on helpless flyers, but there was no indication of deliberate German-scale mass exterminations. In the unregistered torture farm of Funa Camp near Yokohama, brutality was common. One prisoner was openly beaten to death by a brutish guard known to the prisoners only as Kengo Cho. 7 died of malnutrition. There was as yet no report on how many had died from the neglect of worse in the Hellho Hospital or Omora camp prisoners. Approximately 4,200 Americans, British, and Dutch remain in camps in the Tokyo-Yokohama area. Commander Harold Statson of Admiral Halsey's staff reported as he conferred with the International Red Cross officials on evacuation plans. More than 1,490 have been brought aboard U.S. Navy hospital ships and transports to Tokyo Bay. Officials estimated that 36,000 prisoners, including 8,000 Americans, were in the camps in Japan. Many thousands of others were held on the Asiatic, mainland, Formosa, and the East Indies. Those brought aboard the Navy ships were allowed to talk freely to correspondents. They told of months of mistreatment, undernourishments, and general misery. They represented but a handful of the total, but none told of any such studied, organized, wholesale atrocities as prevailed in Germany. Evidence piled up that the captured flyers and submarine men were given special treatment such as inquisition, torture, solitary confinement, and gagging with metal bits. Some flyers on their way to prison were dragged through towns and cities where they were displayed before jeering crowds. They were spit upon, cursed, and beaten. Women in the crowds were the most vicious, said Sergeant Donald Bloodgood of Long Beach, California, a B-29 gunner who bailed out of the damaged Superfort. September 19, 1945, news from New York. Machinist mate John Stanczak of 813 Boston Street, Bicknell, Indiana, was back in the United States today after more than 40 months as a prisoner of the Japanese. Stanczak and 27 other U.S. Army and Navy Liberties arrived at LaGuardia Field on an Air Transport Command C-54 after imprisonment in Java, Singapore, and Thailand. The men were survivors of the 1st Cruiser Houston and the 131st Field Artillery Federalized National Guard unit from Texas. Mr. John Stanczak, Clark Junior High School teacher and former state representative, announced his candidacy for state representative on the Democratic Party. Mr. Stanczak, member of the 1961 Indiana General Assembly, has also served a total of 4 years in 2 terms as Bicknell Democratic City Chairman. He retired from the United States Navy after 20 years service, spanning World War II and Korea, and is now teaching in the Industrial Education Department at Clark Junior High School. He held a bachelor and a master's degree from Indiana State University and has a total of 15 years teaching experience in the Vincennes Township, Vincennes Community Schools. His civic activities include 2 years as a Bicknell chairman for the United Fund and 3 years as chairman for the Loyalty Day Parade in Bicknell. He's also a member of the Bicknell Civic Club, International Platform Association, Disabled American Veterans, Veterans of Foreign Wars, American Legion, Harmony Society, Bruceville Run Gun Club, and Freelandville Conservation Club. He is a past exalted ruler of the Elks Lodge in Bicknell. Mr. John Stanczak, 90, formerly of Bicknell, passed away at 2:20 a.m. Sunday, December 3, 2006, at Bridgepoint Health Campus in Vincennes. John was born April 27, 1916, the son of Wozniak and Frances Zapeska Stanczak in Linton. He married Helen Ford on July 6, 1962. She preceded him in death. John was a shop teacher at Clark Junior High School, where he retired in 1974. He was a past mayor of Bicknell and a state representative in 1962. He was a chief warrant officer in the Navy during World War II and a prisoner of war. He was a member of St. Philip Catholic Church and a lifetime member of the Elks, the American Legion, VFW, and the Harmony Society.